Good evening, study partners. Tonight we will be studying chapter 5 of Mishna Eruvin. Tonight's class is dedicated in loving memory of my dear mother, Rivka Bas Harav Shlomo. Tonight marks something else. Tonight marks the second year that we are studying together Mishnah. So it's already been a full year, and this is the beginning of the second year. So I thank you all for joining us, those who join us here live and those who join us on Facebook. For those who are joining us via Facebook, why don't you make a comment below and let us know that you are joining us. If you have any questions, you can put them in the comments and I will be sure to address your questions. Mishnah Aleph. Keitzad ma'abrin es ha'orim. How does one extend the town? So the question here is, we've already been talking about for quite some time in this Masechta about the idea of extending a town with, extending your boundary with an Eruv. So technically that can be a house that's in no man's land. Your house is your home base, and then you can extend, you can walk out of your house any direction 2,000 cubits, and now you can extend it another 2,000 cubits. That's in relation to a home that's an isolated home. But what about a town? Towns have many different houses. So the question is how do we measure the town, and in what way do we extend it? Bayis nichnas, bayis yetze, a house that is recessed or a house that protrudes. Pogam nichnas and pogam yetze. A tower is recessed and a tower protrudes. Hayushom yidu diyos. Gvois asaret vachem. Or if there were ruins of homes that had once inhabited people in them, that are still, the ruin is still 10 handbreadths high, uksharim, and there are covered bridges, which has a hut for somebody to live in there to protect the bridge. What are they called in the American children's literature? The trolls. You have a house for the troll there who collects the toll at the bridge. Unefoshes, or mausoleums, which a room was built over a grave and candles are lit, and it contains a place, a dwelling for an honorary watchman, a watchman who's watching over these graves. I've seen this, by the way, in Eretz Yisrael. You see that some of the graves of our holy sages, there are people who set up a little abode there, and they honorarily watch over the graves. When I went to Rabbi Akiva with my dad years ago, there was a man living there. What are you doing here? He lives there to watch over the grave. Sheyesh behen beis dira, in which there is a dwelling. So moitzinas amida kenegdam, they extend the boundary opposite them. Va'oisen oisen kimin tavlu merubas, and they make it like a square tablet. Kedei sheyenishkor es hazaviyos, so that you gain the corners. Now, there's a lot of words that we just said, and it's a little bit hard to imagine. So I took a picture from the Art Scroll annotated version of the Mishnah, and here they have a wonderful picture which really helps you understand it. All of these little squares are houses or towers or graves. It doesn't matter. Now, they're not all, it's not symmetrical. It's not built in a grid. So from this one is all the way to this side, and this one is, these are the furthest to this side. And so what happens is you draw an imaginary square, an imaginary line from the furthest in all directions. Are you following? And then you extend 2,000 cubits, but not just 2,000 cubits from this, 2,000, 2,000, 2,000, 2,000, but in the corner from here, because this extends 2,000 this way and this extends 2,000 this way, this corner is all within the tchum. And so from here, from this corner to here, is going to be 2,800 cubits. Instead of 2,000 cubits, the corners, you're going to catch in the corners even more. And so this is the point of the Mishnah, that although not all of these are filled, although they're only sporadic and they're spread out in nature, and again, whether this is anything that counts as a home, whether it's the bridge with the toll booth that the person's living in, whether it's the grave site that somebody's living there, or it's a bona fide home, or even a rune where somebody once lived, but it's still somewhat of a mound, and it's 10 tfachim high. All of these are used, all of these are counted, and then you square them out, and then from there, each direction 2,000 amas, and the corners are gained. So again, that's a complicated Mishnah to understand, but once you have the picture, it's really quite simple. Mishnah Beis. Neisnim karpif le'ir. A karpif is an open space of 70 and 2/3 cubits. 70 and 2/3 cubits. So it's a little less than 71. A third of a cubit less than 71 cubits wide. This is a karpif. And karpifs create, when you have an eruv, a string eruv, like we have in our town, karpifs actually create problems. That's a discussion for a different time. Now, this open space here, this idea of a karpif, which is the open space, 70 and 2/3 cubits, says Rabbi Meir, Neisten karpif le'ir. When you have a city, so in addition to the city, you give it an open space around the city, which is considered like part of the city. And that's where your line is drawn for where you're going to have 2,000 cubits beyond your city. And then, of course, you can create it with a eruv, you can go an additional 2,000 cubits. But again, that's like this picture. But here, it's not showing the karpef. In this picture, it's showing where the last line, where the last house is. That's where the line is. But Rabbi Meir is saying is that from the last house, you have an additional 70 and 2/3 cubits, which is considered like the idea comes from the Ori Leviim in the Torah, the Levite cities. It talks about you leave it a space around for beauty. And this is actually considered part of the town. It's like the parks of the town. So this is what Rabbi Meir says. Now, the Chachamim say, Lo yomru karpef eleven shtei ayoris. When do we say that we extend the city 70 and 2/3 cubits as a beauty of the town or as an addition to the town? He says, the Chachamim say that in a regular town this doesn't apply. But when you have two towns that are distant from each other, and if you put this karpef of 70 and 2/3 cubits and another 70 and 2/3 cubits, and they're going to merge those 141 and a little bit of altogether, the two karpefs together, they match. So now what happens is that the two cities now become one city. Because if you gave this karpef to one and you gave the karpef to the other, so each of the parks are meeting. So now the two cities, because they're so close together, we give them this extra space, this extra buffer zone, and we merge the two buffers, and now they become one space. This is what the Chachamim say. Now, this idea of giving a buffer zone, an additional 70 and 2/3 cubits to a city, only applies only when you have it between two cities. If you have for each 170 and a little bit cubits, so now, as we just explained, each of these extra karpef areas are added to the town. The karpef of this one, the karpef of that town, now they're meeting in the middle. And so there's 140 and a little bit, 141 and a drop between the two cities. They're all one in terms of the Tchum Shabbos. So now, if I want to make a Tchum Shabbos, so if I live on the most western side of one side, and I go to the end of my town, to the end of my karpef, to the beginning of the other karpef, which meets it, into that city, to the end of that city, now I can make a Tchum 2,000 cubits past the second city. So now I've extended my walking area tremendously. Make sense? What? Now you can go for a long spazier. Good. Gimel. V'chein, similarly, and again, this Mishnah is
Keep going on like that.
you can, in theory, keep going on like that. Listen, when you have a tremendous city, you have Manhattan, you can walk from the beginning of Manhattan to the end of Manhattan. And in fact, you can walk over the bridge into Brooklyn. You can walk for hours and hours and hours. What?
Go on to Fort Lee.
Over the George Washington, you probably could go over the George Washington. I'm not sure how that works. Certain bridges
because
are...
George Washington is too much of a ravine.
It's a separate, you know what, I don't want to get into to exact cases, but based on, the next halacha will actually help us understand this a little bit.
Sprawl. Stretch. There's no breaks.
This is another Mishnah which would be somewhat difficult to understand, and I think the Art Scroll Mishnah series, the annotated, anthologized commentary for this picture, which really helps us understand this Mishnah well. And I'm going to pick it up in a moment. First, let's learn the Mishnah, then we'll see the picture. Similarly, 3 towns that are placed in a somewhat of a triangle. If the two outside, so you have 2 and 1, if between the 2 outside ones there is less than the 2 karpef areas that we explained, which the 2 karpefs add up to 141 and a little bit, and a fraction. So you take the middle one and you put it inside the other 2, and you make them like 1. What does this mean? So let's look at this. Let's look at this here. First, I'm going to show it to everybody here live, and then I'll show it to the Facebook audience. Here's the triangles. Town A, Town B, Town C. Could you see that? Town A, B, and C. Town A and Town B, if between... so now, Town C is all the way out over here. We take this and we pretend that it's in the middle over here. We move it over. You see this? Town A, Town B, Town C. You move it over. You pretend that it's actually in between here. So now, in between A and C, if C were actually in between the 2 towns, if there's less than 141 between A and C, if C had been moved over, and then similarly, if there's between C and B, if C, again, let's take C and move it over. That's this dark space here. It's a pretend C. We just moved it over. It will require some geography and topography and all of that kind of good stuff. But if we moved C over and we pretended that C was in middle instead of being to the side, and then there's less than 171 between A and C, and B and C, 171 cubits. So it makes it 1. So A, B, and C, even though C is not in between, it makes all of these considered as 1 town. So look at this here. I just want to
171 between A and B.
Between A and C and B and C, even though C is not really in the middle there. And I'm not 171. I'm sorry, 141. I apologize. 141. 141. So now it becomes 1 big town, even though C is really to the side. It's mishulash. It's in a triangle. You move it in. You pretend that it's in. Now measure it. Had it been inside, would there be a karpef on this side, a karpef on that side to merge it? And you can merge all 3 towns in such a fashion. And again,
So the whole thing's like 1 town.
correct. And so you can walk all of them, and then you can make an Eruv past the last one to get an additional 2,000 amos. Yes. Again, so we're not talking about carrying here. Every time I got to remind you, there are different types of Eruvim, and we're not talking about that in this Mishnah. Okay, Dalet. Ein moidedin el bechevel shel chamishim. You can only measure when you measure. So when we start measuring from towns, how do we know where this extends from? So it's not theoretical, it's practical. You have to actually physically measure. So either sages of the town, the elders of the town, the rabbis, got to hire people. and measure this. You got to do a topography report and a geography report and measure exactly what's going on here. So, so the rope with which you measure should be 50 cubits long. Not longer, not shorter. It has to be exactly 50. And when you measure and you're holding it, so where do you hold it? By your heart, where you're most likely to get an accurate measure. You can see if it's sagging or anything. So that's the level where you hold, where the surveyors, the land surveyors, are going to hold the rope. What happens if you're the measurers, the surveyors, they get to a valley or a mound? So they should swallow it. What does it mean? They swallow it. So here, again, nice picture. So here they're going into a valley and here's a mound. So the two surveyors in the valley, they hold it up this way. And that's the valley. Could you see? And maybe move your chair up closer so you could see. So here's the valley. So they just basically, if they were measuring it along the ground, so this would be much longer. Because you're taking into consideration either the mount or the valley. But since they are holding it up high or above the mound, so in such a case, what happens is that the distance is actually lengthened with this process. You understand?
Right, because you're using less rope.
Because you're using less rope. But if you put it along the ground, you would need more rope to... Good. In the case where you cannot do this, a case that's very high, right? The mound, let's say it's not a mound, but it's a mountain and it goes all the way up here. So what do? You pretend like you're able to pierce through the mountain. And so you're saving a lot of...
How do you do it accurately?
Accurately? So the way you do it is a simple concept. It sounds very complicated. Well, today's day and age, you can use some sort of laser technology. But in the old days, all you would do is you put high and you put it low. And then you put it high and you put it low. So in other words, you don't... Here, I'll show you a picture here. See this? See that? In this way, it's the same as if you had pierced the mountain. You see that? It's the same as if you had pierced the mountain. When you use this method, when this person goes high and this person goes low, it's the same as if you pierced the mountain. Hey, Mishna Hey.
Isosceles right triangle. And using the hypotenuse.
Good. Mishna Hey. Ein moededin ela min hamumcha. Says the Mishnah, when it comes to measuring, you have to use a professional surveyor. You can't just haphazardly get the gabbai and the rabbi on a spare Sunday and start measuring. You hire a proper surveyor. What happens now when you hire the surveyor? And so let's say you have a square area, and they measure from here this way, and they measure from that there way. But they end up they did two measurements. One was a little bit more generous, and one was a little bit less generous. So obviously, when you start in a square area or in a straight area, obviously somebody made a mistake. One of the measurements are off. So now which one do you follow? The more generous result or the less generous result? Again, we're talking about in a place where the border is straight. So now you're starting from a border. So if the border from the eastern border is a straight border, and you measure one end, and then you measure another end, and then you measure on the last end, it's crooked. So in other words, one was more generous, one was less generous. So says the Mishnah, Shemin lamokim shiriba. So when we make the official boundaries, we don't have to measure all again because one was a mistake, right? Rather, the one which was more generous, that becomes the boundary for the Tchum Shabbos. All the way around. You're looking at me like I'm crazy. Again, when you take two measurements from a straight point. So you start over here, you measure out 2,000 cubits. And you measure from here, 2,000 cubits. It's a straight boundary. Now this one ends up here, and this one ends up here. Okay, so obviously one of them is incorrect. There's no other possibility, right? When you start, if it's a straight boundary, one is longer, one is shorter, one is incorrect. So now the question is, do we need to remeasure? Or do we follow the shorter survey, or do we follow the longer survey?
The longer survey.
Says the Mishnah, the longer survey.
I'm sorry, thank you.
And I'll explain why afterwards. What happens if a different scenario? You had two different surveyors. One year we surveyed, and we got to a certain point, and we put up a post. Tchum for the city of Fairlawn. Okay? And then another surveyor comes, another team comes, professional, because we already said we only deal with professionals. And his boundary is 30 feet short of the first person's boundary. So now it's two different people. It's not the same surveyor, it's two different surveyors. Sheimim Lamaruba, again, the one that is more generous, whether it was the earlier one or the later one, that is the one that we follow. Why is this? Because the Tchum Shabbos, as it's practiced, is a Rabbanan. The Rabbanan were the ones who had established that we're going to follow the more generous one. It's very simple. There's a dispute as to whether the Tchum Shabbos is according to the rabbis or according to the Torah. So the accepted practice is that this type of Tchum Shabbos is midrabanan. The 12 mil, which is the encampment in the desert, that one would be Dairaisa. But the way it's practiced now is midrabanan. So whether we go for the longer or the shorter, the rabbis are the ones who are established these laws, and they can establish that when you have a longer measurement and a shorter measurement, we go with the more lenient measure, which is longer. Now, even a servant or a maidservant, a female slave, they can tell you the Tchum Shabbos goes until here. Not every time, not always do we believe an Eved or a Shivcha. But in terms of this, the Chachamim said, believe them. When they tell you it's up into this and this point, you can believe them and you can go walk until that point. Shaloi Amru Chachamim Eved Kanani, Eved Ivri for sure, Eved Kanani. Shaloi Amru Chachamim Es Hadover Lahachmir El Lahokel. When they established the rules of Tchum Shabbos, everything was to be ruled leniently and not more strictly. And again, because the rabbis are the ones who made this law, they are the ones who are allowed to establish, can authorize, you can rule leniently. People who are not always believed, we're going to believe them. Longer measurements, shorter measurements, we're going to go with the longer one. Vav. Ir shel yochad v'nasa shel rabin. If there was a town, this Mishnah, we digress here, and we go now to we change the subject here for one Mishnah. It's an interesting idea for to shtufei mavos. The same way like that we make a shituf eruv. There, you remember that it's a type of eruv that's called shituf mavos. When you have an alleyway and you have properties that are in that alley, that go into that alley, and at the end of the alley is a Rishus HaRabin. We've spoken about this in previous weeks, in previous chapters. So now this particular Mishnah veers off into this direction. If you have a city that belonged to an individual person, and it became public. He sold it. He sold all the houses, and now it's belongs to a bunch of different people. Marvin is kula. So now you could use the shituf not just for the alleyways, but for the whole city. You could do a shituf for the whole city. Why? Because since it belonged to one person originally, what's the point of shituf? A shituf is a type of eruv in an alleyway.
Eruv.
Yes, it's a type of an eruv that we put in an alleyway. So which was spoken about in the early chapters. So now, I think in the first chapter. So now, if a person owns a whole town himself, so not only could he do this shittuf in a mavi, but he could do the whole town. If he owns the whole town, this single person could make a shittuf and combine all the houses with this shittuf. Not with the Eruv string. He could do it just with his shittuf. So now, what happens if it belonged to one person, but then he sold it to different people? So now it became a public place. Marvin Eskula, so you can make a shittuf Eruv in this whole town, because since people remembered that it was once a town that belonged to an individual, they won't get confused between that and a true public town, and public squares, public areas. Now, v'shal rabim v'nasa shal yachid, but a person was very wealthy and he buys a whole city, which was once a public area, but now he bought the whole thing, lock, stock, and barrel. So, in Marvin Eskula, so you can't make a shittuf in the whole town, because since people see this and view this as a big city and a big area that was public, so he can't do this. Why? Because people are going to now see this as a public area. Even though he bought it himself now, people are going to see this as a big area, and they're going to forget the people of this town, the children who grow up in this town, are going to forget the whole idea that you're not allowed to carry on Shabbos. There's no string Eruv here that we keep talking about, number one. And number two, everywhere he's allowed to, it's a public town. He doesn't differentiate that once upon a time it belonged to one person, and yet we're carrying in the whole town. So when he goes somewhere else, what's going to happen? He's going to think you're allowed to carry. So so what could you do to bring up the population to remember that you can't carry in other public towns? So what could you do? Ella imkain, unless asa chutzala ki ir chadosha sheb Yehuda sheyesh ba 50 diurim divrei Rabbi Yehuda. There is a way around this. If you make an exception, you say the whole town is going to be done with this shittuf. We're going to merge this whole town, but we're going to have just a small city-like size, like the new cities of Yehuda, which is 50 house units. So like the new, what is it called by you? Crosser. So a place like that, there's more than 50 units there. So let's say there was 50 units there. So we say the whole town of Fairlawn used to belong to Mr. So-and-so, Mr. Fairlawn. Fair was his first name, Long was his last name. Now we merge the whole Fairlawn with this shittuf. But crossroads at Radburn are excluded. So now people who grow up in the town, they know, here I can carry, here I can't. And they start recognizing that you can't just carry everywhere. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Yehuda says you have to have a 50 resident area that's excluded, and then everybody knows. They can make their own Eruv there, they can do whatever they want, but we know that we just can't carry freely between it. And so now the idea of not carrying on Shabbos is still in the minds of the population. Rabbi Shimon says, Shalish Chatzera Shel Shnei Votim. 3 courtyards of 2 houses. 3 times 2 is 6. So we don't need 50 houses. 6 houses. An area of 3 courtyards, 2 houses each. That's enough of an exclusion that people in the city that once belonged to one person, people growing up there will remember the idea of not carrying on Shabbos. Zayin. Clear? Zayin. Misha Yava Mizrach va'omer livnoi orav li b'mayrev b'mayrev omer livnoi orav li b'mizrach. A person says to his son or anybody else, he says on Friday morning, do me a favor, set for me an Eruv. He's in the Mizrach. He says, set for me he's in the east, set for me in the west, an Eruv. Because he wants to walk 2,000 feet, amis, cubits, beyond the west side. Or vice versa. Now, he tells his son, do either way. No, not from 2 sides. He tells him, either way. Either he's in the east and he tells him to do it in the west, or he's in the west and he tells him to do it in the east. So now comes nightfall. And this person is still east of his house or west of his house, depending on which example we use. So now, what happens here? So now let's say he's over here. He's in the west. This is the west and this is the east. So now his son made the Eruv over here. Okay? Now, if the man is over here on the top and the Eruv is on the bottom. East, west. His house is over here. His house is over here. So now, I'm sorry. Let's do it the other way. East, west, house is over here.
Triangle.
This particular case, let's use this first case. It's not a triangle, it's a rectangle. He's here, the Eruv is here, and the house is here. So now we're talking about an open field. It's the simplest way of understanding this Mishnah. Open, it's not a city. Simplest house in the middle of nowhere. It's the easiest way to understand this. So again, he's in the east. He tells his son to make it in the west. His house is over here, on this side. This was the north or whatever, it doesn't matter. So now, if between him and his house, which is on the side, is less than 2,000 amas, so he's now on Shabbat. Now it's nightfall. He's standing over here. To him to get to his house is how many cubits? Less than 2,000. So could he walk home?
Yeah.
Yes. To get to his Eruv, could he get to his Eruv? No, because his Eruv is more than 2,000 cubits. So says the Mishnah, if between him and his house is less than 2,000 amas, but to get to his Eruv it's more than 2,000 cubits, so he's allowed to go home.
They can
But
go home and from his house.
but his house, his Eruv is canceled. That's the bottom line. His Eruv is canceled because it's more than 2,000 cubits from here. So this becomes his ground. This becomes his home base. Now, if his house could go to that Eruv, that's a separate story. But here in this particular case, it doesn't get there. So he could go home and that's it. He can't use this. This Eruv gets canceled out because obviously he would rather be home than be excluded from an Eruv that he can't even get to. Right? So this Eruv is canceled out.
Is it canceled because it's evening?
It's canceled because it's evening and he can't even get to it. So we cancel out the Eruv.
Is the evening because he can't see it?
No, it's because it's evening and he can't get to it. It's 2,000 amas. It's too far for him to reach.
Couldn't you make it like I'm sorry.
No, I'm just confused as to the. I understand that it's
Yeah.
over 2,000, but it was during the day.
His son made it during the day. At some point in the morning. But by nightfall, he's still standing here, and now his Eruv is here. And because his Eruv is here, he has no way of getting to his Eruv, because his Eruv is out of his Tchum. He could only walk 2,000 cubits. He didn't say, he can only walk 2,000. If he walks 2,000, he can end up somewhere here.
Right.
To his house, he can walk to. Boom, right to his house. Right to his house.
Right.
But to his Eruv is too far. So his Eruv gets canceled out, because it obviously is meaningless to him.
Right.
So his house is now home base, and that's it. Now, but let's look at another case. Le'eruve alpayim amas. But what happens if the scenario was this way? This is the east and this is the west. His son made the Eruv over here, but his house is all the way over here. So now it comes nightfall. He's standing here. To get to his Eruv, it's less than 2,000 cubits. But to get to his house, it's more than 2,000 cubits. So in such a case, Osur Lebesa, he's not allowed to go to his house. He can't get to his house. It's more than 2,000 cubits. He's himself standing here. But he can get to his Eruv. And so his Eruv, he's allowed to go to his Eruv, but he's not allowed to go home.
Couldn't you to do it like you did with the triangle? If his
No.
house over there, you can't
No.
push it.
No. Because it's more than 2,000 cubits. That was between two cities. Here we're talking about Eruv of a house, Eruv Tchumen, and that's talking about Eruv Tchumen of two cities where they have a karpef. The rule of a karpef is in a city, not according to all opinions even. So only when it's necessary to merge two towns. Here, there's no town here. It's just a house. So what kind of karpef? You don't have a karpef around the house, according to no opinion. Let's go further. A person who places his Eruv in the extension of the town, around the town. So around the town is part of the town. So he didn't gain anything. Because the Eruv doesn't help him. Because even without that, he can go 2,000 cubits beyond that. So now what did he do? He didn't do anything. He didn't accomplish anything. Because he put it within the tchum of the town itself. Not only within the tchum of the extension of the town, not the tchum. Nasin chutz latchum, if he put it outside the actual boundary of the town, not the 22,000 amos here. In this particular case, the tchum means the actual boundary of the town. Afilu ama achas masha nishkaru mafsid. Whatever he gains on one side, he loses on the other side. This is a simple halacha that we've been talking about all along. Let's say this is the town. And so here's the border of the town. If he puts his tchum 10 feet this way, so now, ordinarily he would be able to go 2,000 amos. Now he can go 2,000 amos plus 10 feet. But over here, normally we'd be able to go 2,000 amos. He could go 2,000 amos minus 10 feet. We've been talking about this all along. Fairly simple idea. Anshe ir gedela malchen es kol ir ktana. Ve'ein anshe ir ktana malchen es kol ir gedela. If you have a big town and a small town, and the big town, within the tchum of the big town, within 2,000 cubits, so this is well beyond the karpef areas, but let's say the small town is 1,000 cubits, right? And it's a distance of 1,000 cubits away. The two towns are 1,000 cubits apart. So the karpef law obviously does not, because the karpef is only 140. So here we're 1,000, a large town, a long town, and a short town. So now this is the long town, and now here's a short town on top here. So now the small town is 1,000 cubits, and it's 1,000 cubits away. So now when you walk from the big town, the whole small town fits within the tchum of the big town. So now the small town is discounted to 4 amos. And so you can walk through the entire other town plus another 1,996 cubits, because that whole small town is considered as 4 amos, because it's, you with me?
Yeah.
So now, Anshi ir gedela malchen is kol ir ktana, vein anshi ir ktana malchen is kol ir gedela. But if you start off Shabbos in the small town, your 2,000 cubits doesn't include the whole other big town. So now your measurement is an actual measurement. From your 2,000 cubits, you only get to go 2,000 actual cubits into the big town. You following? Mm-hmm. Good. Ketzad. Now this word ketzad here is a killer. You got to learn the Gemara in Eruvin and Daf Samach Aleph Amud Aleph. Essentially, in simplest terms, takes out this word ketzad and just said, forget the word ketzad. That's the simplest way of looking at it. We're new halacha. A person who's in the big city and he puts his eruv in the small city. In this particular case, so the same exact scenario that we spoke about before, but you put your eruv in the other town. Either way, so now the entire town becomes. Here we're not using tchum. Here you actually used an eruv. So now the entire town becomes one, and you can go 2,000 amas beyond the other town. Because these two, you can walk to one another, like we just said, because there's only 1,000 cubits, for example, between the two, and you actually placed an eruv in the other town. So now, either way, whether it's the big to the small, we already know this, whether it's the small to the big, because you've already established your residency in the big town, so now it works both ways, and you can walk an additional 2,000 cubits beyond that. But Rabbi Akiva does not allow for this. He says wherever your eruv is, you only have 2,000 cubits from there. He doesn't hold from this idea. You had a question?
No, I was going to say, to establish residency, is it by placing the eruv?
So, according to the first opinions, as soon as you place your eruv there, that's where your residency is. You're done. You're good. And so, because this town is within the tchum of each other, so now you placed an eruv in the other one, so you could walk back and forth. So if you're in the big town, you already could walk through the whole small town. If you're in the small town, you're establishing that my residency is in the big town.
Verse said, "What's a I mean, I understand, but what's Kira?
Karpef? What'd you say?
Kirafate.
Karpef is a bonus area. It's an open. Karpef literally means an open area. In certain scenarios, we add a karpef when it's only less than 141 amas between two cities. So we say that half of that is beauty of one town, half of that is beauty of the other town, is bonus area of each town. The two bonuses come together. Try to focus on the Mishnah that we're at, because you're asking from previous Mishnahs. That's a different scenario here. Here we're talking 1,000 cubits. So there's no karpef rules in this Mishnah.
So it's an open. Kirafate is an open area.
Karpef is an open area, but it's not tremendous. It's only 71 cubits and 70 and 2/3 cubits.
Right.
Tes. Mishnah Tes and the final Mishnah. Omer lehen Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was the one who said in this previous Mishnah that you only have 2,000 cubits from where you establish your Eruv. Omer lehen Rabbi Akiva says to them, Iyata moidim li b'neisen Eruvin b'ma'ara shein li m'mkayim Eruvin ela alpayim amma. Let's say you're in the wilderness and there's a cave, and you put your Eruv in the cave, right? So you're establishing residency in the cave. So don't you agree that when you measure, now you have only 2,000 cubits from your Eruv? So Amrullah, they said to him, when do we have this business with a cave, that we will measure into an actual cave, and from the Eruv itself in the cave? When does these measurings take place? Bisman she'ein diyurin, when there's no one living in the cave, and there's no Eruv, and there's no one living in the cave. So now, if I put my Eruv somewhere else, and I measure into a cave, so then wherever the Eruv stops, wherever the Tum stops, whether the 2,000 cubits stop, that's where it stops, even though it's in the middle of a cave. But if I've established residency in the cave, so the whole cave is like at my house, and then beyond the cave is 2,000 cubits. Aval yesh b'diyurin, but if there's residency or inhabitants in this cave, halachas kula, you could go through the whole thing. V'chutzala, and beyond it, alpayim amas, 2,000 amma. Nimsa kal teicha mi'al gaba. So which means that a cave, there's a top to this cave, right? So in the cave, I can go everywhere, then plus 2,000 amas. But on top of the cave, had I placed my Eruv on top of this cave, so now it's like open field. I can only go 2,000 cubits. Now, the Mishnah.
You said he could go 2,000.
No. He's talking about
If you place the Eruv instead of in the cave, on top of the cave.
the cave, and then you have
The cave
2,000
becomes a
outside.
dwelling.
What?
The cave is a dwelling.
The cave is the dwelling on the inside, but if you put it on the roof of the cave,
Right, then
so
it's
now
a
there's no
field.
dwelling here. And now you can only go 2,000 cubits in each direction. And what we said, that for the measurer, when you measure, you only have 2,000 amas. So again, if there was no one, if the Eruv was not established in the cave, but the Eruv was established somewhere else, and now we're measuring, this is what we said before, and now you end up the 2,000 cubits in the middle of a cave, guess what? That's your end. Because that wasn't established as an inhabited cave. Your inhabitants was established, your residency was established where? Wherever you put your Eruv. And now the fact that it ends in the middle of a cave, so you don't have you can't walk in the whole cave, you can only walk the 2,000 amas. Because again, this is a cave that's not inhabited. Thank you so very much for joining us this evening. Somewhat of a complex Perek, but it seems like Baruch Hashem, you all caught it. So thank you so much. Anyone on Facebook who has any questions, please comment below, and I will be sure to respond. Thank you so much. Please join us next week at 8:30.